Well, I hope you enjoyed watching that video clip. Again, it's an interesting exercise to do, isn't it? I think for teachers who are constantly having to battle with students with misbehaviour, they can feel very isolated in their classrooms, and it's a very lonely place and very tiring if you're constantly coming to school every day and you have the same students who you have to battle with behaviour problems. And so these conflicts can become very stressful, and sometimes the problems can get a lot worse. And it's very important that we see students as belonging to a school, not just a class and not just a teacher. When we have students with disabilities and students with behaviour problems, they are part of the whole school. And so as teaching staff, we should be making a very strong effort to be collegial and supportive. Of course, it's always great to be preventative, isn't it? We think, oh, well, if we put these preventative strategies in, we won't have problems. But can I tell you that teachers will always have students in their classrooms who have varying levels of disruption. So some of the methods that we use today are not punitive, which would have happened in the past, but now we're looking for a more positive approach. And I know a lot of you have been involved in the positive behaviour intervention strategies, which I'll talk a little bit more about later on. But the important thing is to be positive, to have in a classroom that is organised, predictable, interesting curriculum, interesting and effective teaching methods, and well-established routines. It also has always been clear to me that teachers who are very well organised, who don't try and wing their lessons, but have actually planned every detail, have a lot less behaviour problems than teachers who are not organised. If the students know what to do, if it is very clear, their instructions, if the lesson is at their level, then we don't have as many behaviour problems. I didn't say we wouldn't have any. What I'm saying is we don't have as many. So the first thing I like to ask schools is, what's your behaviour management policy? What does your policy actually say about students? And what is the goal of your behaviour policy? I would hope that a behaviour policy is full of positive statements, and that the aim of the policy is that all students will be responsible for making their own choices and managing their own behaviour. Now, some behaviour policies have a 3-tier approach. Tier 1 is the school's expectations and rules. The Tier 2 is for some students who need a bit more additional guidance. And Tier 3 is for students who have a need for an intensive behaviour support plan. Of course, there are strategies that we can use in the classroom. And I think the strategies that we find most helpful is if we look at the classroom and look at, well, what things can we move, modify, adjust to make the conditions conducive for learning. I wouldn't be putting lots of soft toys on children's desks that were going to detract them for learning. I would have lots of things on windows that are going to be distractible for students who have attention deficit disorder. And so we've got to look at the conditions. And are we teaching the students self-control strategies? Is our environment positive? Are we providing active and supportive supervision? Are we discussing behaviour codes regularly in the classroom as part of the curriculum? And are we explicitly teaching those rules? If a student doesn't know how to speak quietly, then maybe we need to teach them to speak quietly. If they don't know how to interact and take turns or listen, then we need to teach them those skills. By far, probably the approach that I've seen that works the best, especially in special schools, is the positive behaviour intervention strategy. But I must stress that this is a team approach. So a team that gets together, that actually monitors behaviour, it has like a welfare team, that just doesn't leave the strategies to the classroom teacher, but the team diagnoses and looks after certain students who are on their radar. And that's an important aspect of PBIS. So what do we know, some of the research about classroom behaviour? Well, an unsuitable curriculum can lead to poor behaviour. Boredom, frustration can lead to troublesome behaviour. If the class size is too big, if the groups are too big or too small, the rearrangement of the classrooms, furniture can be a problem. And any rules that you set in a classroom have to be democratic. All of the students and the teacher have to have their say in establishing the rules in a positive way. Now, some of the strategies that have worked in the past for me, and also what research says about this, are as follows. We can tactically ignore the behaviour. Yes, ignoring it. We've got to be careful though. We can't just ignore it ad nauseum, because sometimes ignoring escalates the behaviour. We have to, at the same time as ignoring, actively go and praise up students who are doing the right behaviour. We have to have our directions simple. We can't give the students a long list of 6 instructions and expect them to know them and follow them. We've got to give it to them 1 or 2 or 3 in a series, make sure we've written it down and help them go through the instructions. We have to be positive in the way we relate to students. Their questions have to be given immediate feedback. If a student is not acting appropriately, we would remind them of the rule. We'll give them simple choices. A very simple choice is, would you like to use a red pen or a blue pen to do your work? You're not telling the students they can't do their work, but you're giving them choices. You are only going to isolate students from their peers if you've been through all of these tactics I've just talked about. But sometimes you have to move them away from their peers. Sometimes, unfortunately, you've got to remove them away from the class. But removing from the class should not be seen as something enjoyable. They should be moved to another class with work to do, and that the enjoyment should be coming back to the regular class. Of course, sometimes it's very hard to pinpoint how the behaviour actually starts, and it's always good to get a colleague to come and watch sometimes your lesson, and I will be saying these are things that I'll be looking for. The frequency of the behaviour, how often does it happen? Which lesson is it happening in? Is there a certain time of the day that it's happening? Is it when there's whole class activity, or is it groups? Is it in the hall when they've got to sit in a big group? What's the teacher doing at the time? What is the teacher's immediate response? What's the child's initial reaction? How do the other children respond? And what strategies did teachers in the past use on this student? Successful strategies. So sometimes it is as simple as going to ask their teacher from last year, how did you manage the student? Remember what I said, it's a whole school approach. And of course, sometimes we have to modify behaviour. It's just not acceptable, and we need to use ABA, or what we call applied behaviour analysis, which is looking at when a behaviour happens, what's the consequence. But we need to go back a bit further than that. How did the behaviour work? What initiated it? What was the thing that started the behaviour? So once we know what started the behaviour, what triggered it, and then we know the behaviour, then we've got to have the right consequence for the behaviour. I'd like to think that there are strategies that we are using for challenging and emotional disorders. One thing we want to not let go of is cognitive behavioural self-control, where we're coaching the student with self-talk how to regulate their own behaviour. But teachers will need to use some other methods along the way. Like I said before, tactical ignoring, but sometimes signal interference. When you're teaching and a student is not engaged or a little bit off task, just the look, that look at that student, or that stop the lesson and look, is enough to get them back on task. Sometimes just walking towards them when you know they're doing something and not stopping the lesson, but just standing next to them is enough to put them back on task. Sometimes we do need to use reinforcements and rewards and tokens in our teaching, and and I've used that, but can I remind you about this, about tokens and rewards and reinforcements? If you have a token economy in your classroom, that is, every time a student gets does something good, you give them a token at the end of the week. You know, you can trade your tokens. 10 tokens equals a little toy, happy toy, or 10 tokens equals a rubber or rule or whatever. They only have a shelf life of 3 weeks. Just remember that. It's okay. The novelty will wear off, and it's not so engaging anymore. The other thing is behaviour contracts, and you've used these in the past, where a student is on like a card, and every lesson they get a tick or a cross, how their behaviour has been, and then at the end of the week, or end of the day, whichever is the frequency, the teacher sits down with the student to praise them up for their good behaviour. And of course, the good behaviour game, where you can divide the class into 2 teams, and you can give them points throughout the week, and then at the end of the week, the winning team gets a class reward. Of course, you can use social stories, where I know you're very familiar with that, where you can actually pictorially draw or download from the internet what is the right behaviour in performing a certain task. And yes, and sometimes we do have to use punishment, but very sparingly. Punishment should not be something that is used very much in schools. We should be looking at positive ways of engaging with students. And again, we like to be thinking that we're helping children control their own anger. Some of the things that we do come across in schools is bullying. A lot of the students that we have in our special schools have already been bullied, and they can become very good bullies themselves. And that can be a direct physical attack, as punching or hitting. It can be a verbal attack, attacking the student's behaviour, their race, their weight, what they say, how they say it, putting them down. It can be verbal attacks like that, or it can be a rumour, spreading rumours about students that are not true. Or sometimes it can be very indirect. It can be ignoring and not including students, not befriending them, or isolating them. I heard of one type of bullying once. It was a group of girls, probably from Mean Girls or something, like some movie like that. They were those sort of girls, and they had a tissue. And at the beginning of the day, the queen, who's the leader of the girls group, if she dropped a tissue near a certain student, that was the student who you were not allowed to include or talk to that day. Very sneaky, isn't it? How could a teacher find out that unless they were able to talk to the student, and if the student would share their concerns? And of course, we're very much aware these days of cyberbullying, a way that students can hurt each other through the internet, through various Snapchat or internet or messaging, in a way that does permanent relational damage. We need to act quickly about this. These sorts of behaviours should not be tolerated. We should be actively looking for it, asking our students, being involved in their lives, to see if we can be proactive in stopping these sorts of behaviours. But can I say that they're going to happen? We have a zero tolerance in our school systems for bullying and cyberbullying, but there will continue to be students who do this because they themselves are hurting. Basically, bullies were bullied before and or abused in some way, and this is their retaliation. The next thing I want to talk about is students with attention deficit disorder. This is very close to my heart because of my own family, having members with ADHD. And can I say that there's hope? They grow up. They live good lives. And it's up for us in our school systems to look after our students with disabilities. And they need structure. They need predictability in the learning environment. They need effective strategies to hold the child's interest. They need work that's engaging and appropriate at their level, and they need strong visual input. You're probably going to use it as computer-assisted learning, and you're going to teach them self-management and organizational skills. We need to monitor them closely. They can do things that are inappropriate or silly because of the way they think. And we need to provide opportunities for praise and reinforcement. We need to tell them when they do something right, not that was great or good, but why it is praiseworthy. You know, I like your work, the sentence you wrote, because you used descriptive words. It made a picture in my mind, and I like the way you capture my attention. These are the sorts of things that students need to hear from us so they can repeat that behaviour again. And of course, in this day and age, we have a lot of online resources. So many online resources that can help us. And in your textbook, at the end of chapter 7, you'll see there's a great list of online resources. Well, friends, behaviour management, it's the joy of teachers to teach students. And once you've captured them and you enjoy teaching them, you have very few behaviour problems. I'm not saying you won't have any. I still remember some of my challenging students. But can I tell you that when you have a challenging student who you find it very difficult to manage in the classroom, you basically need to have another teacher come alongside you and give you support. Don't go it alone. We live in a world of teams and of supporting each other, and let's do Classroom Manager together. And I'll see you in the next video clip.